Okay, we can also look at the causes of unemployment. So why is it that unemployment occurs? And when you think about unemployment, what you want to think about is obviously unemployment increases during economic downturns, and we'll turn to that in a minute. But also, actually, unemployment never goes away. Even when economies are growing and strong, unemployment it remains. Yeah. So in the UK, unemployment it struggles to get below 4%. It has done from time to time. So what we can say is that there are kind of two types of unemployment. There's unemployment that occurs in a recession. So that's demand side unemployment, and that's driven basically by a decrease in aggregate demand. And there's unemployment that exists even when there isn't a recession, and that's supply side unemployment. And it's caused by supply side weakness. Yeah, there are reasons that people who are unemployed are unable to find jobs. So let's have a let's have a look at each of those in turn. So with demand side unemployment, it's really tempting not to develop your lines of argument. It's just kind of demand goes down, so unemployment goes up. But why? So what we're saying is, I mean, obviously you can draw an ADAS diagram, if it makes you happy, and you got to go, oh look, blah 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 blah. There's aggregate supply, there's full employment output, that's GDP, there's your price level. Initially there was an output gap at that level. Aggregate demand falls to there, so now there's a bigger output gap. But that hasn't actually explained anything. I mean, you could have said GDP goes, but they haven't told me why jobs are lost. So why is it that a decrease in aggregate demand actually leads to job losses? What you want to do is, like we said with inflation, you want to relate it back to the individual firm and say, well, what's going on? What we know is that when demand falls, firms face a decrease in sales. As a result of which, their revenue goes down, and therefore, if they don't do anything, they're going to face a decrease in their profitability. So what are they going to do? They've got fewer sales, so their output has gone down, so they don't need as many workers. Secondly, they've got less revenue, so therefore they need to cut costs. Well, it's fairly obvious what's going to happen, isn't it? Which is that, if you don't need as many workers and you need to cut costs, some of those workers are going to let go. They're going to be made redundant. Now, you'll often find that unemployment is what's sometimes called a lag indicator, and that's because firms don't know how serious a recession is, how long it's going to last, and often firms don't want to fire people because they've invested quite a lot of time in them. They've invested in training and so on and so forth. They know them. They know their strengths and weaknesses, and they know that if they let them go, when they come to hire again, it's going to be difficult, because they've got, there's then suddenly you don't know about the new staff who are coming in, they're inexperienced, you've got to train them, so on. So often it takes time for a decrease in demand to lead to an increase in unemployment, but eventually it's going to. So what about when it's not a recession? So I mean, the main thing I'd talk about there then is make sure that you explain, you can also talk about negative multiplier effects and so on, but just kind of why is it really that firms are letting people go? So we look at supply side unemployment. This is unemployment that exists even when the economy is doing well. So even when the economy is growing, there's still unemployment, and there are three main reasons for that. So one is what's sometimes called structural unemployment, and I split that into. It's really due to immobilities in the labour market. The idea that people can't easily switch, either geographically, so there's kind of regional issues, or occupationally, they can't switch easily, from one job to another. So you have geographical and occupational immobilities, which are both types of structural unemployment. So why is there geographical? Why are the geographical immobilities? Really, there's two basic reasons here, which is A, for some reason, workers don't relocate, and we can see easily why that might be. It's things. It's the housing market. Most of the jobs are in the south, whereas which is where property prices are really high. There may be social factors. You don't want to break up your children's education. You've got friends and family and so on. But secondly, sometimes it's that firms don't relocate either. So it could be the case. So firms don't relocate to areas of high unemployment. I mean, in theory, you would want to, because we know that where unemployment's high, wages are going to be low. So why not relocate? And the answer is that wages aren't the only factor. Your labour isn't your only factor. infrastructure is important. Links to other businesses, links to suppliers, access to airports, access to main markets like Europe and so on, often attracts firms into the south. Yeah, so they're not prepared to go to these regional areas where unemployment tends to be higher. Secondly, there's occupational issues. So why don't workers just retrain? It's not that easy. There are costs of retraining. For you. You may not have the ability to do so. You may not have the underlying skills and qualifications and so on. So if there's a decline in a particular area of employment, like coal mining or steel happened in the 80s, it may be very difficult for those workers to acquire the skills that they're going to need to move into other areas. Secondly, even if you've got the right skills, it's still going to take time. So we're still on supply side, but even if you've got the right skills, it's still going to take time to move from one job to another. And that's your second supply side unemployment, which is called frictional unemployment. And friction is just that idea that you don't walk out of one job and get another. For the most part, the world doesn't work like that. And there's 2 or 3 reasons that might be so. Firstly, you may lack the motivation to go and quickly find another job. Perhaps benefits are quite high. Perhaps you fancy a break. So therefore, there's always some people who are kind of unemployed for a few months. And in the UK, those of you that I've taught, when we looked at the stats, we can see there's about 750,000 people who are unemployed for less than 6 months. Always. So there's always this kind of idea of churn in the market. And that's often a sign. When you look at unemployment, that's often a sign of a healthy economy. In fact. Which is, it's the process of creative destruction. That there are, jobs being lost in some sectors, and those workers are going to, where they're more needed, where they're more useful, where, the economy is growing. Secondly, there may be informational issues. So you don't necessarily know, where the best jobs are, where you can, where you can be employed usefully, and so on. You're going to take time to search for information. And thirdly, there may be legislation. So in a lot of jobs, you've got to be background check, teaching, the police, that type of stuff. That all takes time. So again, you can't immediately walk into new jobs, and that's always going to be there. You can probably reduce it, perhaps by improving information or cutting benefits to encourage people to get a job more quickly. But it's always going to be the case that there is some friction, in the labour market that means that the process of relocation, changing from one job to another, isn't entirely straightforward. And finally, there's what's called real wage unemployment, and this is again fairly obvious. It's just that idea that maybe you're just too expensive. And therefore firms can't afford you. And that could be because of things like the national minimum wage. It could be because of things like trade union power, that type of stuff. So we end up with a situation where, if that's wages and that's the quantity of labour, we end up with a situation where, for some reason, wages are held up here at W star, and then supply is at S1, demand is at D1, and therefore we have unemployment. So those are your main causes. In terms of solutions, I'm not going to do a separate video on that this time. Just go back and look at the stuff on fiscal and monetary policy, and supply side policies. So if you go back to the earlier ones, fiscal and monetary policy is talking all about how to expand demand. Supply side is talking about how you deal with structural unemployment. We talk about other stuff as well, but you should be able to use that to work out what to do.